Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final So What If panel. So this has been, so far, a 15-month campaign, and I think by the time we finish, it's going to be up to 18 months, which is a mighty long time to keep a campaign going. But at the start of it, we knew the whole purpose was to give it the time it needed to cover all the subjects that we wanted to cover. So for those that have been following the campaign, I will make this introduction quite brief because we have two parts to this event. The first is our panel event, which you can see all our panelists here. And then the second part is myself, Laura and Ashley, who started the campaign. We're going to be for about another 45 minutes, just an overview of all the panels and everything that's happened through it. And we will be looking at the good, the bad and the ugly bits as well. So the So What But What If campaign actually started in November 2021, and it started as a women's safety panel event. And the reason was we'd been doing a women's safety focus with thriving survivors in their social media, and we always finished that with a panel event. So normally we would have maybe 2-3 guests, and we send out a bunch of invites and to see who wants to come on, and we ended up with about 10 or 11 guests on that panel, and what was meant to be an hour lasted over 2 hours. What it did do was kick off a massive list of questions and subjects that we hadn't even covered in that time in regards to women's safety. And then Clyde One got in touch, and they were doing their Light the Way campaign, so we then did a second panel in December, brought them on to discuss that, and again there were just more questions. So roll on to January 2022, and we decided that actually we needed to do a much bigger campaign and start discussing the subjects that really nobody wants to talk about generally, or are hard discussions. So we decided that it'd be a 12-month campaign for the very reason that we had 11 different subjects that we wanted to talk about. Now, we'll talk about this in the second half, but actually through this year, probably another 11 subjects that we haven't covered that came to light. So it's an ongoing conversation. So in January, a team at Thriving Survivors, a team of survivors, named the campaign the So What But What If campaign, because there's so many, well, so what, this happened or that happened, so what you have to do, have apps, etc. to keep you safe. What if? You know, what if we didn't have to have this? What if we didn't have this conversation? What if we didn't need to have this campaign? And at the end of every panel event, we ask everyone, what is their what if? So at the start of January, we then got some feedback that actually it shouldn't just be about women's safety, and it should be about safety for everybody. And then what was the actual purpose in this? So we then, after about a month, came up with the fact that it's about creating a safer future for younger generations, and it's about everybody's safety. And that made sense as well because of some of the subjects we were going to go into discussions with. So that is where So What But What If came from in a really, really brief 3 minutes. And since then, we have had multiple panel events. Our plan was to do it every single month for a year. But just with different things, we managed to get through 10 different panel events. We did one live event. We have got pages and pages of blogs, video content, loads of links to different resources that we've gathered through the year. And the purpose in this is we wanted to create a platform for all individuals, organisations, companies, other safety campaigns to come together, and everybody can talk about the different subjects, have their opinions, there'd be no judgment, and it was a place that everybody could share what they think needs to happen and what's wrong with society at the moment that's stopping our younger generations being safe. We will then, after this final event, we're going to take all the evidence and all the panels and create a paper that's going to go to Scottish Government. Now that's going to be a 2-month process, and that will go to Scottish Government, and it will collate our main asks based on everything that everyone that's been involved have said. And then we'll see where that goes from there. So that's my quick overview. I am going to ask everybody in the panel just to do a quick introduction as to who they are and what what they do and how they're involved in the panel. And then we'll get straight on to questions. And Laura, who I'm going to say is on my left, which might be a different place to you. Laura is part of the So What campaign as well. So it's myself, Laura, and Ashley from Thriving Survivors. She's going to keep me right on timing because we've got a lot to get through today. So on that note, Laura, why don't you start with your introduction?
Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Laura McGuinness. I'm the founder of the Glasgow Girls Club community and GGC Business Club, and I was really delighted to be a part of this campaign with One for Growth and Thriving Survivors.
And Elijah?
Hi, I'm Elijah, and I was part of the youth panel, obviously reviewing the panels that you guys did and kind of talking about that from a young person's perspective. And I was also on the LGBT panel as well, just kind of giving my thoughts and things about how to improve safety for LGBT people.
Thanks, Elijah. Stuart?
Hi everyone, my name's Stuart Allardyce. I'm the director of the child protection charity Stop It Now Scotland, which focuses on the prevention of child sexual abuse. We've been active supporters of the campaign for quite some time, and I was one of the individuals on the webinar that we did around online child sexual exploitation.
Thanks, Stuart. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a mentor and group facilitator with Thriving Survivors to help people who've suffered trauma. And I was very privileged to be part of the first group within Survivors Voices that came up with the slogan for So What But What If.
Thanks, Emily. And Amy?
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Rue from the Glasgow Girls Club. We were involved with the So What If around the context of a safety campaign that we had actually launched around the same time, which was an app in the form of an app. It was a survey for people to tell us where they either witnessed instances of street harassment or abuse, or had experienced that from women. But we did a couple of phases of that campaign. One of them was asking women directly, and the other one was sort of bystander, you know, where and what did they do about it, if anything.
Thanks, Amy. So it's worth noting that we've got Glasgow Girls Club and Glasgow Girls Club, which are two separate things, and they came together and discovered that actually there's loads that can be done together, despite the fact there's only one letter difference in the name. So Stuart, I'm going to start with you. So you were on our online danger and grooming panel, and I found that panel absolutely fascinating, being the mum of an 11-year-old and thinking I was doing things right, and it totally opened my eyes, which I'll go into the next part. But why is this subject so important to talk about just now, and what were your main takeaways from it?
It is such an important subject to talk about, isn't it, Heather? I mean, I suppose what we talked about included trying to define what it is that we're talking about here. So we're talking about the experiences that children have under the age of 18, when people have sexualized conversations with them online, when people ask them for sexualized pics or videos, these are kind of unwanted kind of requests that young people have, through to experiences of sexual harassment, online solicitation, and indeed grooming for children to either be abused online or offline. So we're talking about a kind of wide range of things that are incredibly damaging in terms of young people's developmental experiences. I think some of the take-home messages from the discussion was that it's a huge and complex issue, that in fact is incredibly prevalent, not just in Scotland, but in the UK and internationally. So it's something that many children will experience, particularly girls. Let's be absolutely frank about this. You're 4 or 5 times more likely to experience this as a girl than as a boy. But we also talked about how some of the myths that we have as adults about what the dangers are sometimes really quite unrealistic. So we talked about how we often assume that the risk will be from strangers. Actually, the research in this suggests that actually more risks are presented by people who are known to young people online. And we also think that the dangers are uniquely coming from adults. And of course they do, but actually probably more of the risks come from young people themselves, which is kind of borne out by quite a few studies that we have now, and indeed data that we're now getting from Police Scotland. So a much more complex picture than we normally think about it, which is like simple messages about stranger danger don't hang well. What does stranger danger mean when children are being exploited in online gaming forums? What's it say to say somebody's a stranger when you're interacting with them, perhaps over an extended period of time, and actually you don't think of them as a stranger? So our messaging about stranger danger is not very helpful. And I suppose the other kind of take-home message, which I found quite useful as a parent as well from the discussion, was that although the idea of putting down kind of restrictions and putting things in place in terms of the kind of technology you have to limit your child being able to view things and interact with people makes perfect sense when your child is quite young, say under the age of 10. When young people begin to kind of move towards adolescence, the game changes completely. And actually, we need to have much more kind of open-ended conversations about online safety in the context of young people's lives. We need to bring a curiosity to what young people are doing online. We need to interact with our own children online. There's a whole set of things that I think is kind of positive digital parenting, which are probably the ways that we need to go, rather than just thinking about actually how can we restrict the technology in some way, because young people will always be one step ahead of us, so particularly teenagers.
It's true. Do you know, Stuart, the main highlights there that you brought up, down, I found it fascinating, that, and I love your digital parenting. I've written that down. That's perfect, because the way that we were parented doesn't work online. It doesn't work online. And I think it was Kim that was on that panel, and I wrote down, she said, cocky kids thinking that they know more than you. And actually, in this case, they do. And I thought it's actually true when it comes to the access that they have now. They do know more than us. And our, take the asking them what they're up to, what they're looking at, it's just not going to work. And for me, I find that actually having those difficult, awkward conversations to allow, at a young age, to allow the open conversation when they're older is really important, but it's not the way that we were parented. Therefore, I think my main takeaway from that panel was us as parents, or even just, if we deal with young people at all, the learning has to come from us first before to allow the children to be safe and come to us. I thought it was an absolutely fascinating panel, and I have to say, from the because it's something that we didn't have to deal with, or our parents didn't have to deal with. Okay, so I'm going to go next on to Amy. I was just delaying there because I got a wee note to say my internet was unstable. So hopefully you can still hear me. So Amy, we kicked off the campaign in January with yourself, when you were doing, yourself and Dawn from Wise Women, when you were doing the Equally Safe campaign. So how did you feel the two campaigns complemented each other? And what are your main takeaways now that you've followed the campaign for the last year?
Yeah, so as you say, Heather, it was the Increasing Women's Safety Together, I think, was the name of the campaign that Wise Women had actually approached us as the Glasgow Girls Club as a sort of community tech builder. So we had experience of building technology with community that helped to create social change within sort of the spaces that we cared about. So Wise Women were sort of introduced us through the Violence Against Women Partnership for Glasgow City Council. They wanted to build an app that could help surface some of the experiences of women in Glasgow City, across the city, in the sort of the City Council sort of region. And we happily got involved with that as a community social enterprise that supports girls and young women at risk of crisis. So for us, sort of getting involved with that firstly was like a no-brainer. It was, you know, we were sort of delighted to do that. So the purpose of that project was to help to inform structural change and help to inform policy at Glasgow City Council level. So Wise Women are a statutory partner for violence against women. So it was sort of done in partnership with the Violence Against Women Partnership for Glasgow City Council as well. So really what we were looking to do from the Increasing Women's Safety Together side of things was just really understand where women were experiencing street harassment, abuse on the street. It was very much about public spaces, public realm. Was it about lighting, and just really sort of getting underneath that and creating a report around that. So of course that sort of nicely coincided. I think there was a bit of a zeitgeist, wasn't there, sort of the end of 2021 with everything that happened in the case with the police officer. So I think that really brought that sort of watershed moment. So I think all of those things sort of coming together sort of towards the end of 2021 and just sort of saying it's enough, we need to really take action on this. And I think Wise Women sort of coming together with us to create that sort of space, an online space that could sort of collate that information. And then you're sort of reaching out and sort of meeting with Laura as well, and sort of, I think, as you've said, you know, the Glasgow Girls Club and the Glasgow Girls Club sort of just looking at obviously very, very different entities with sort of different customer base, if you like to say. You know, looking at the ways, where are those crossovers, like where are those shared aims, like how do we sort of look at the ways that we can sort of create something that's bigger than the sum of the parts. And this has just been a brilliant example of how that can actually work. From our side as the Glasgow Girls Club, Wise Women obviously would have a lot more to say around this in terms of policy and the structural change and systemic change that they are now involved with in terms of other sort of things that have came off the back of the app that we built, which actually is now in the realm of sort of conscious construction. So they're working with some construction companies around how can we make this a kite mark so that when you're going to build a new development, whether it be a bridge or something in public realm, how are you actually taking into consideration the experiences of women and safety for everyone? As we know, if a space is safe for women, it's safe for everyone, and really that is the reality, I guess, from our side, and sort of pushing forward for women's safety really is to say if it's safe for women, it's safe for everyone. So the construction industry have taken note of the work that we've done around that. The surveys that we've done has now been sort of taken out into that space of construction. You know, how are we building spaces to make sure that they are considering the safety of everyone at first and foremost, because we look at it from a disability point of view, like we that's already considered, but now there actually being some kind of kite mark around that sort of women's safety and safety in general. So yeah, so the So What If campaign just came along at the perfect time, I guess, for us to sort of coincide with that. We launched it at around the same time that you guys had launched the So What If, and I think from our perspective, the sort of the coinciding of the campaigns, I think it just opens it up to a broader audience, because for us as the Girls Club, we're really focused on marginalised girls who are, their voices are the least heard. They're the girls that are the most at risk. So they're maybe living in areas of severe sort of disadvantage. They're in areas that have high instances of sort of domestic abuse reports through the sort of the reporting that we hear through police partners. And we know that they're actually the girls that are the most at risk of becoming involved in unhealthy relationships and sort of domestic abuse instances as well. So for us, sort of having the voices of those girls heard is and through the work that we did with our app, we were able to sort of have videos that were like sort of films. We did sort of dramatisation films where we got young women that we work with to enact some of the instances that they felt unsafe on the street, and that we heard about it through rap music that we wrote, where girls are telling us how they feel unsafe, you know, walking through the shops, and it's just a common theme for us, you know, with all the girls that we work with, you know, that they feel unsafe at school. You know, they told us recently in a workshop that they did with them, that with Women's Aid, they said that they feel unsafe at school, and that isn't just about sort of a gendered thing. That's actually just across the board, that they actually just feel unsafe with their peers, they feel unsafe in the classroom. So, you know, safety, just massive topic. And I think sort of the work that obviously the campaign is doing, from your side of things, to be able to sort of bring that into a broader context, but also hear the voices of the girls that often aren't heard, I think was probably one of the biggest sort of things for us that was, I think, really powerful.
Oh, thanks, Amy. So it's interesting you mentioned the construction industry, because we deliberately brought on someone from this construction industry onto our perceptions panel because of the, we all know at some point, somebody, either yourselves or somebody you know, will have walked past a building site and you'll get a wolf whistle or a comment. And actually, we'll chat about it later, but there was, it was Lee who was on, and he totally flipped it around on us from a male's point of view, and how actually the bigger picture is why more's not been done to get women into construction, and then switched the whole thing, and it created a whole new conversation, and it was really interesting. But yeah, the two campaigns launched at the same time, and it was a perfect launch to the So What campaign as well, because having the two campaigns together, looking at safety and originally what was a women's safety, it made sense. And we actually talked about it last week when you said in that very first one that if you can make women safe, then it does have that ripple effect across safety for all as well. And that has come up various points through. So thank you, Amy. Elijah, I'm going to come on to you. So you have been involved a lot. So not only have you been on the panel events, you've also been in our youth panel from the start. So just for those who don't know, the youth panel was created because I think it was maybe February, March time. We aren't the youngest on organising committee. We may look young, but we are not youths. So we decided that actually, if we're creating a campaign that is for the safety of a younger generation, it would be interesting to know that the average panel, the youngest age tend to be about 35 plus. So is everything that we're saying, does it actually relate to what the youth are thinking? This panel did was then they have watched over every single panel event we have done and given their opinion and view on it as youths, which has been brutal sometimes, Alita, but really, really interesting. So you were involved in the LGBTQIA plus panel, you've also been in the youth team. So tell us, Elijah, from your point of view, what did the youth panel feel about them, and were we getting it right along the way? And was the perception that we have on the panels the same as you guys have?
I think for the most part, like, you know, we all three of us kind of agreed with a lot that was being said. And for some of it, you were really hitting the nail on the head. But I think it's interesting because, like you say, there is an age difference. Like, I'm 21, so I'm just like newly an adult. So we've got that kind of perspective of having lived through it, especially in things like talking about, you know, growing up on the internet. Like, that was our generation a lot more. Like, I've been on the internet since I was like 13, you know, like talking to people from all over. So it's, you know, it's really important to kind of get that perspective as someone who's lived through it as well, I think. But it was really interesting, like, hearing everyone's point of views, because everyone has a different point of view. Like, even if you're agreeing with the points that are being said, you know, you perceive it differently in your own head. So hearing that put things into perspective even for us, you know what I mean? So it was like a lot of give and take almost doing the youth panel, because, you know, you're getting some valuable information from the older generation, and we're giving valuable information back to you. And doing the LGBT panel, I mean, that was important to me, obviously, as a queer person. And I think that, you know, queer safety right now is so important given everything that's going on. And just being able to kind of give my thoughts and opinions and tell people my experience from a personal level was really important as well. And I think that definitely opened up a lot for, I know you were quite shocked when I brought up healthcare issues for someone like me as well. So again, it's really give and take doing these panel events. And I think that's, you know, it's really important to get that conversation going between people who are from different backgrounds and have different opinions. And, you know, it's really been enlightening for, I think, everyone involved. And I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for creating this campaign, because it means a lot to me. And I hope it means a lot to everyone, you know, who's watching and everyone who's come along the way with us as well.
Yeah, Elijah, you've made some great points throughout, because I've been going back through everything for this live, and just reading some of your quotes have been top notch. It's just been so refreshing for us to have the younger generation's perspective on it, because like you say, very often we agree with the points, but it's having that fresh take on it, that fresh lived experience, which has been kind of vital for what we're looking to take to government. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Elijah, when you mentioned the NHS. It's something I hadn't thought about. It's just I hadn't, and why would you know? It was the whole thing about this campaign, is that we're bringing different people together. There's things that not everyone thinks about everything. So it was quite fascinating. Laura was in charge of all things youth on the in the campaign, because she was the youngest out of all of us. So perfect. Right, Emily, on to you. So Emily has been involved in the panel right from the start. So before it even went live, Emily has always been there in the background, not on the panel events, but always around doing stuff and answering the emails and questions. So Emily, you're on here, like, from your point of view, you're working with a lot of survivors of various different backgrounds, and you've watched been through the panels, watched the campaign grow. And so what are your main takeaways from working behind the scenes and from the charity point of view, and who you support? Why is it important to them?
Just from the aspect of every kind of survivor's point of view, including my own, just being able to feel safe, even just, I mean, some people can't even leave their own homes because they still feel unsafe as a result of what's happened to them. And it's about how to build that safety back up for them, and having that voice and at the other end of the phone, you know, saying, I get it and I've been there. Also, as a result of the campaign, from my own perspective, actually going back to what Stuart was saying, stranger danger working, although we don't work with children ourselves, I actually live by a school, and one of they always say Happy New Year or speak to me, which makes my day, and usually it's just hello and that's it. But one of them actually asked how I was, which was unusual, and I said obviously I'm good, and they said that they were terrible, and told me why. And I just felt that was a bit more than somebody of that age, given the fact that they didn't know me. So I actually rang the school and said what had happened, because I thought, even though I don't have children myself, if that was my child disclosing this to somebody they didn't know, potentially that could, you know, mean that somebody could find a way in to then build that rapport over and over again if they wanted to cause harm. And I wouldn't have been thinking like that had this not, you know, things like that been brought up as a result of this campaign. And I think it makes people more aware of, you know, things that could be considered, you know, shared more than they should be, and could cause more of a danger to people. Also, I think for me personally and a lot of my clients, it's about trauma informed is a really big thing. I hear it over and over again about how they've been triggered by people who should be there to support them. For example, one person was carrying out an assessment with a person that they trusted in a position of care, and they started to disclose things from the question that was being asked, but because the questions hadn't been explained to them properly of what the assessment was for or anything, they got quite upset, and the person was like, stop, that's not what and just those words made the person panic even more. And I could understand that. I can relate to that, because I'm still terrified of making mistakes, you know, as a result of trauma. We often are. Just to have that sense of knowing, you know, even people who are in the profession that you think should know these things, and you expect them to kind of have this relatable position, and they often don't. So trauma-informed practice is one of the big things for our clients to cause, you know, to help people feel more safe.
Thanks, Emily. I think it's interesting as well that you were talking about the sort of ongoing trauma as well, and it's probably not something we've talked about lots on the panel event, but it is the outcome of what we're trying to fix and to address. So when we were on all the panel events, you were all asked your what ifs. Now, you might not remember them, but I wrote them all down for you so I can read them out. So the purpose in this, the what ifs, were to give us an idea of what the questions should be to the Scottish Government, what everyone's thinking. And sometimes it was really interesting that the what ifs were totally different to what you originally talked about on the panels. And actually, Elijah, for yourself, I have two for you because of the two different panels. And I just want to read them out. And having gone through this year-long campaign, particularly you, Amy, because you were January, you're right at the start, would your what if still be the same, or would it change? And a second part to this, so save me coming back around it all again, is that your what if is that ideal scenario. But what would you actually, in the paper writing to Scottish Government, if you could ask for one thing that is going to improve safety for the younger generations, what would that be? So, Amy, we start with you. So your what if last January was, what if we never had to have another conversation about this ever again? Is that still what if?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I think that's really what imagining in a world where we don't have to worry about harassment, rape, oppression of any sort. You know, that's my overall what if. Yeah,
and
I'd say it was.
If we had to put one thing in this paper to the Scottish Government, one ask or one task, one thing that they could do to help us a step towards improving the safety for youths, what would that be?
I think just what I touched on earlier around, you know, the hearing from the most marginalised in our communities, be that the LGBT community or communities of severe deprivation, you know, making sure that we get to the edges of these conversations, because the people that we're really trying to support are the people that are really the hardest to reach a lot of the time. So I think just sort of being really, really thorough in terms of consultation. So if they were going to set up any sort of future investigation or inquiry around this, that I just making sure that we put the mechanisms in place to hear from the people that are the hardest to hear from. I think that's the biggest thing, because if we don't hear from those people, then change just won't happen. It can't happen without us hearing from those people.
I like that one. That's a really good one. Noted. Stuart, so I'll read yours out. So yours was, what if every adult who was worried about their sexual thoughts or feelings towards children or their interaction with children managed to get support before they committed an offence? And similarly, what if every adult who was worried about the safety of a child was able to get the right kind of support to be able to protect children more effectively before abuse takes place?
Gosh, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I mean, I would still wholeheartedly support that. The reason being that it's not the responsibility of children to stop themselves being sexually abused. It's really important that we do stuff in schools, and we teach kids about what abuse is, and if they're worried about anything, that we create the possibility that they can go and speak to a trusted adult about that. We should never stop doing that. But actually, abuse stops when adults make different choices. Either people being more protective because they're already protective, or those who present a risk of harm making better choices.
Excellent. And what would you, if you had to, I know it's always just unpick one thing, but if you had to pick one thing that the government could help to improve, what would that be?
Well, we've made some amazing headroads. Is that the right word? Amazing progress in relation to violence reduction in Scotland over the last kind of 15 years. Thinking about violence reduction as a public health issue. And actually, when you think about violence reduction, I mean, that is something that cross-cuts lots of different silos in Scottish government. It's about education, it's about health, it's about policing, it's about social injustice, it's about a range of different things. But actually, what the government managed to do was they found a hub for that. They put that together in one place and said, right, we will make some differences and changes here. The area I work in and have done for the last 20 years is child sexual abuse, either working with those who perpetrate harm or working with survivors. And we don't have a strategy around tackling child sexual abuse in Scotland. There is one in England, there is one in Wales, there isn't one in Scotland. We don't have a specific portfolio in Scottish government in terms of, an elected member of cabinet who has responsibilities for issues around the protection of children from certainly from sexual harm. So I think there's something about this needs to have a home somewhere in Scottish government. It needs to have some ownership where politicians are taking responsibility, because this is a massive issue that perhaps it affects between 1 in 6 and 1 in 10 children in Scotland. But most of those children who are harmed never tell anyone. And if they do tell anyone, most of them tell people in adulthood. So it's an invisible issue. But we know it's there. We know it causes massive harm in the country every year. So we need some responsibility taken by our parliamentarians and some prioritization about this, I think.
Do you know, I did not know that there wasn't that hub or actual responsibility anywhere in the Scottish government. That explains a lot, I suppose, doesn't it? If it's obviously not the key issue or a key importance to them, if that's not there. So
it just cuts across lots of different silos because it is very complicated.
Yeah.
But we've already shown that we can fix that complexity in other areas like violence reduction.
Thanks, Stuart. Thank you. Elijah, I've got two for you because you were on the youth and the LGBT panel. So the first one was, yours are quite long, so bear with me. Okay. So what if queer people can exist without governments trying to debate their rights? What if we can just be allowed to exist without it being something people have to debate over, and without people telling us we're making their lives unsafe? That was your first one. Your second one, what if we can go out and live our lives without being fearful, with our rights guaranteed and not being debated, and have access to the tools and information we need, but more for everyone to have those tools and information, and for us to have better health care for trans people, better education, not just for LGBT people, but cis people as well. And just everyone be inclusive and included in conversation, everyone be more knowledgeable, and everyone feel safer. It really sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really about everyone. And I think that's what people are missing, is that, when you take these conversations individually and you're talking about rights of one group or another, people think, oh, I'm detached from that. But actually, you're not. And it's about everyone, and we're all fighting for the same thing at the end of the day. And I think it's, really important to take that into consideration when talking about these things, is that we are talking on behalf of ourselves, but we're also talking with each other about all the issues that are coming up, because we all care about them. as a collective group. And I think that needs to be taken to a much larger scale as well. And, you know, I stick by my what ifs, because that really is, you know, why do we need to be debated? Why does anyone need to be debated? It doesn't just apply to me or to other queer people. It's, you know, why does any of this need to be talked about? I mean, obviously it's important, but it kind of goes back to what Amy said about, you know, and her what ifs, like, what if we didn't have to have these conversations, you know? And that's kind of the summary of that.
Yep. Do you know, Elijah, when I read that, for me, it totally summed up the whole campaign, that it is a platform for everyone, and it's about all youth. And yeah, your what if just, for me, summed up what the campaign was. So Emily, Elijah, your one ask to the government.
I think my one ask to the government is that there's more education, and that they educate themselves and their sort of peers in government, because I feel like there's a lot of fear, especially right now. And I think really not being afraid to talk about their fears, but do the work, and, you know, do the research, get themselves educated, and really focus in on, well, what does this mean for the people at the heart of it? What does this mean for us? Really focus in on us and focus in on what this would mean. You know, it's like, we want to validate people's worries and fears, but we don't want to be a scapegoat for everything going wrong. And I think, you know, really get in touch with themselves about why they're so afraid, and educate themselves, educate their peers, and just really get enriched. Because I had a conversation recently with someone who said that they were approving of people doing what they liked, but they weren't sure about, you know, like GRA reform. And it was because they didn't have the information. And it's like, how can the general public have the information if the government doesn't? How can the general public know what's going on if they're not educating themselves?
A lot of the subjects we've had conversations about all comes back to education. So thank you so much. And Emily, what is your what if?
Can't unmute. There we are. Thanks. My what if is, what if everybody was trauma informed and that life could be made easier for everybody? And by that, I mean that if people are more trauma informed, they become more empathetic with people's situations. People don't get as triggered by certain situations, and people wouldn't necessarily be afraid to go to the doctors or afraid to go out if, you know, they knew that you know, they were going to be treated kindly and carefully. And also, I've had a lot of clients come to me who have been discriminated against because where their life could have actually been made easier. They could have stayed in jobs, but employers don't like asking the right questions in order to help them do that. No, that's too difficult. If we implement that, then everybody, and it's like, no, this person just needs this one thing in order to be able to be included in this, to be able to do their job.
And Emily, what would be your one question or ask of the government?
My one ask the government would be to roll out trauma-informed training everywhere, and I mean absolutely everywhere. It's what's important to me as a survivor. Like I say, I still get triggered sometimes and afraid to make mistakes, and I think, you know, just certain language like need, should, as you know, a lot of my clients tell themselves this, you should be doing this. It's like, well, who told you that you should, you need? Maybe try and speak to yourself. Is it, well, maybe try this, maybe try things differently. When we stop all the negative kind of, you know, because it almost automatically makes somebody out to be, you're doing something wrong.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you so much to all our panelists, not just for today, but for all the panel events that you've been on, for all your contributions, your help along the way, my annoying emails asking questions through the last 15 months. I'm not going to lie, we may send you some more. We've still got the paper to finish writing, but everyone's contribution those that are on the panel today and everyone that's been on any panel. It's been absolutely amazing. It has been the biggest learning curve. I think I've probably learned more this year than any other year when it comes to safety. My eyes have been opened, and yeah, it's just been an extraordinary year. We're going to say goodbye to our panelists just now, and we're going to do a short 5-minute break. Yeah, maybe about 2-3 minute break, actually. You can't get that long. And then myself, Laura and Ashley will be back, and we're going to be talking through each of the panel events and the journey that we've had so far and what is next. So Elijah, Amy, Emily, Stuart, thank you so much for your contribution over the last year and today. I will probably email you later.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. See you later.
Bye.
Hello, welcome back to the second part of our event for the So What If campaign. And this bit's a lot more informal. This is myself, Ashley and Laura just having a chat through the whole year, or 15 months it's been. So with our final panel events, and that included some of the panelists and those involved through the campaign, and just really reflecting back on what they found and whether things are still their thoughts from their initial panel contributions to now, whether it's still the same. So for those that might have missed the start, the whole purpose in all the panel events was to go through and chat about difficult subjects and topics that people are scared to talk about or don't want to talk about or aren't regularly talked about. And we're going to take all the findings and conversations that we've had over the last 15 months and create a paper that will go to Scottish Government with the main asks, with the aim being future for younger generations. So I'm a bit off the hook now here, because rather than this being a panel event, this is an open discussion with myself, Ashley and Laura, and we're just going to run through each of the panel events, what's our thoughts on them. We're going to chat about the trials and tribulations along the way, and then what's next, because ladies, you can all agree that this has been a long campaign.
It's been a journey.
It has. Yes, there's certainly a celebration needed for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
So let's kick off by just running through the panel events. So we had, let's just check. We planned to do 12, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and we did 12. We actually had 12 events, even though we missed some months. So the plan was to have one a month. We did miss some out, but from the very start of the campaign, we have ticked off the 12. So we started this off on the 25th of November with the Women's Safety Panel. And that was a beast of a panel, wasn't it?
Yeah, that ran over 2 hours, I'm sure. And we could have talked for another 2 or 3 on top of that, at least, as we started to unbox things. So yeah, it was lengthy.
Yeah, I think that's why the whole thing kicked off, didn't it? It was because of the findings in the chat. And actually, I think everyone on that panel would have quite happily sitting there talking for another few hours, but for the sake of the viewers, we did cut it short. And that led on to the 6th of December, which was the Clyde One approached us and asked us would we help support them on their Light the Way campaign, which was a really interesting one. So that was about campaigning the council, the local government, to get lights through the parks in Glasgow. So yeah, Clyde One, we helped them by doing another panel event on the 6th of December to help launch that. And actually we spoke to them the end of last year, 2022, and they'd actually got some lights in some of the parks and was continuing the campaign. So
Brilliant.
Our campaign is as successful as theirs has been.
Yes.
And then we kicked off, and it was such good timing, wasn't it? Glasgow Girls Club were doing their safety campaign app, which right at the start of January, we all decided that actually this is going to be a long campaign, this is going to be a year long. And just at that point, Laura, I think you had met with Amy from Glasgow Girls Club, bringing the 2 GGCs together.
Yeah.
And then this app was discussed, and it seemed to be the perfect combination to kick it off, because obviously we wanted a platform that all safety campaigns could come together.
Yeah, and it's such a clever app as well, because like Amy was saying on the previous panel event, when councils are considering where to build things or where to add things in a city, 100% taking into account people's records of feeling unsafe in said areas should be done. So I loved what she was said way back in January, and then what she was saying to reaffirm it on that panel there. It's so true. Keeping account of places that people feel unsafe in a city is important for a council.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Also police and everyone else involved in the.
Yeah, I remember seeing a little screenshot of some of the findings, and it was really interesting to see where on the map where the little pinpoints were. And whether there was stuff everywhere, but there was definite little areas, and it was a really, really good project. And it's definitely, I was thinking when Amy was in the previous panel event just before this, it'd be really good to get their findings to include in this report as well, but maybe not necessarily certain areas because it's about the whole of Scotland and the UK, but was there certain findings in regards to types of areas? Is it near industry? Is it in more deprived areas, or is it across the board? So that'll be some interesting information to add in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right,
Laura, you're going to talk to us a little bit about the youth campaign. So the 18th of February is when we had our youth panel. This wasn't the youth panel as in our group of youths. This was actually talking about youth in general as a panel.
Yes.
So I love this event. So on you go.
I love this event as well because I think everything almost kind of relates back to it, doesn't it? Because obviously the campaign's aim is to make the UK, Scotland a safer place for the younger generations. So it all kind of points back to this. And I felt like we had such a brilliant group of experts on, and I feel like I really learned a lot from this panel, as well as you both putting in some really good points as well, because when I was looking back over it, I was looking back over everyone's points. So I've got some notes. I don't want to make sure I'm misquoting anyone or anything like that. So we had some like key findings, and we've got blogs on all the panels for anybody that's listening as well, which are actually a really good read. So when it came to the youth panel, Maddie, who compiled all the blogs, brilliant. She broke it down into some key areas. So online safety and pornography was one, bodily autonomy and consent was another, and educating ourselves as adults. So unanimously on the panel, or that's maybe a bit of a generalization because there was a few who were most comfortable about it, but I think for, we had spoken about feeling a wee bit uncomfortable about the conversations that parents or caregivers should be having with children, and unanimously we did all agree that we should be talking to kids as from a young age, because we had a stat from Marianne and it was something like 50% of school children, primary school children, have watched porn before they leave primary school. Yeah, so that was a shocking stat, wasn't it? And yeah, thinking back to when I was at primary school, like I can't have even imagined watching it. So it shows you how the digital age has made things that are inappropriate so much more accessible. So we spoke about the fact that they are exposed to images that parents wouldn't want them to see from a young age, and there's only so much that parents can do to police. So we spoke about putting things on our phone like blocks. We spoke about all sorts of different things, but fundamentally you can do that in your own house or whatever, but when kids go to school or when kids are with their peers, we can't control what's been shown in somebody else's phone. So that was one of the main points, was to start having the discussions with children as young as age appropriate allows on sex, images which would be deemed sexual and should never be shared. Start having the conversations that some of us might deem to be uncomfortable, so that your children feel safe and shame-free to speak to you or another caregiver about potentially what's going on in their life, and you as a parent or a caregiver can deal with those conversations. So obviously we spoke about some parents really struggling with it, because from our generation, I know certainly my upbringing, we didn't talk about sex. It was left to school. And I think it was Lindsay Mullen from Stop It Now who had, there's real holes in sex education in school. There's a real focus upon stopping getting pregnant rather than consent, and the more kind of dangerous aspects of what sex and sexual activity can bring about. So that was obviously a real kind of eye-opener. And we moved on then to Lindsay saying about, if you are a parent or a caregiver and you're wanting to educate yourself first before you potentially have the uncomfortable conversation. She gave some great resources, which you'll find at the blog. So she mentioned BISH, CEOP and NetAware as great resources. So if your kids ask you a question that maybe you actually don't know, these are great resources to pass on. So we shared a bit of that, which was brilliant as well. We talked about allowing children to know what they're like, giving them the correct terminology for their body parts. We spoke about the importance of that because, we spoke about a court case which had been the perpetrator had got away with sexual abuse of a minor because the minor hadn't been able to provide the correct terminology for her body parts. So we spoke about the real importance of that, and we spoke about the importance of educating ourselves as adults. I had maybe quite embarrassingly admitted I had to Google what the difference between a vulva and a vagina was. So
many videos and stats on that, and you're not the only one.
Oh, do you know, honestly, Heather, see, when I was looking into it, there's like a whole Instagram revolution on it.
Yeah.
About the difference between, so yeah, it's obviously, but again, that harks back to our education as women. I mean, that's our body parts. How do we not know what the difference is? So again, there is an education piece for obviously the youngsters, but for us to continually be educating ourselves, so these conversations don't seem so tricky to navigate, because we had conversations that children pick up when adults feel shame or feel a bit uncomfortable about something, which can in turn affect the way that they behave around a certain topic. So yeah, I've rambled on there, but I actually took so much away from that conversation, and it really fed into the other conversations for me.
Yeah, I think that campaign, or that panel event on the campaign, it was like a proper parenting lesson for me. See the things I learned, the changes that I've made in the way that I talk to my daughter, and the way I talk, and the way that my boyfriend talks, and the way we address things now is night and day to the way I would have before. To the point where when you were talking about that court case, that gave me the utter fear and it made me feel sick. That was horrendous.
Yeah.
And I've had the conversation that she's awkward saying the names out loud, but she knows what they are. And I was like, knowing what they are is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
And I've told her that story and she understands it and she knows the importance. And I think the resources of knowing what to tell kids when, and I think this kind of leads on, it gelled well with the online dangers and grooming as well. There was a lot of crossover. It was interesting. Ashley, you're amazing with your kids at having these conversations young and that open relationship with them, being able to talk to you.
I think it's really important. Kids need to trust us. Do you know, they need to be able to come and speak to you about anything, regardless of how difficult that might be for you to hear. There's like, your children need to know that they can bring that to you, and you'll listen and you'll hear and you'll respond in a way that meets their needs and expectations. So we sort of live and breathe that in the house, and it works. But you also see the other side where my children all have their own views of the world and aren't scared to share them either, which but I think it's so important that they can come and have that conversation, and even though like I've got a child at every stage of development at this moment in time, and it's fascinating how each of them have got different level of needs, and they need different things from you, but fundamentally at the core of that is a love and a trust that they can come and bring anything to you, no matter how difficult that is.
That's so important, because on almost every panel and every learning, it's all about that openness and building the right relationship when they're a kid. And I think that it's it totally underlies across the whole campaign. And this is about a safer future for the youth. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of, through everything, if we could trust our children, if they could trust us, if there was that open conversation, if conversations weren't awkward, then naturally there would be a higher level of safety. No, it wouldn't fix everything, but it would certainly, there would be a greater level of safety than there is just now. So Laura, before moving on from youth, because it is all about youth, this campaign, talk to us a little bit about the youth panel, the purpose. So we had the panel event about youth, and we had youth panel team. So it's two separate things with the same name, which is but it came after the youth panel, this introduction of the youth team. We'll call them the youth team.
The youth team. Yeah, absolutely. I think the three of us, I think after this panel, because we had a couple of students on that panel who brought a youth perspective, and they were brilliant. And I think the three of us then had a conversation, and we were like, we really need that youth perspective feeding through this whole campaign, because if we're trying to make things better for the younger generations, we have to hear them, and we have to hear what they've got to say. So we were really lucky. We connected with 3 youths. So Elijah, who was on the panel earlier on, we also had Rebecca Clark, and we had Olivia Brockett, and we connected with them via Thriving Survivors, or via One for Growth, or via Mind Marvel. So Karen Gibb had been on the youth panel. So we were really lucky to pull together the panel. And yeah, we just basically, the plan was that we were going to goggle box it. So we're going to play all the panels to them and then record them talking about the panels. Now, that's a great idea in theory, but in practice, actually, it was, this is a voluntary campaign. So, and the guys all worked full time. So getting them together, getting dates, we didn't want to put too much pressure on them. We did do one at your office, Heather, and brought them all together with pizza, and it ended up going on for a super long session. So we then were mindful of, well, wait a minute, like what time are they getting home at? And we're thinking safety. So we moved it then to online, and we showed them the recording, we took recordings of what they said. So we did that for about 3 panels, and then we moved to providing them with Maddie's blogs, so that they could read over the blogs and then comment, because we found that to be the best use of their time, pulling it all together. So I have loved reading their perspectives on each of the panels, because like we said on the previous event, more often than not, there was a agreement with what was being said, whether it was by the experts, guests, whether it was by us, but what they brought to it was a fresh perspective, and they brought to it lived experience from a 19, 20 and 21-year-old in today's day and age. What really saddened me was, I've got my experience as a 35-year-old woman of feeling unsafe. And when I spoke to them, they all had their feelings of feeling unsafe haven't changed. There's no bettering of the feelings of safety. And in fact, what became apparent in the first panel that I did with them, spiking came up, because obviously we went through a horrific time, which will always go on, but the media were really putting a focus on injections spiking. That came up with the youth panel, and actually they kind of each had stories about maybe a friend who'd been spiked, or someone they know who they felt as though they had been penalised by a medical professional. So it was almost a wee bit like, no, you were too drunk, or like that, you're just too. So somebody's friend had gone with an injection mark, and they'd just kind of been told, you've just been too drunk, you've just hit it. So they didn't get the tests done to see if there was anything in the injection, any like blood tests done. So there was almost an element of them feeling penalised for obviously going out and having a good time, and also the fact that there seems to be an increase in things like, well, certainly the injection spiking has always been around for our generations and beyond. But yeah, so that really saddens me.
Yeah. They've been a massive addition to the whole campaign, and I think it's really made it what it is and made it more relevant, having their contribution too.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we moved into March, and National Women's Day, and while it isn't directly related to the campaign, we couldn't skip by it that it started off as women's safety. So we did our first and only face-to-face event on the 8th of March for International Women's Day event, when we had Petra from West Brewery and Madeline Black were there. We had lots of sponsors, drinks and tastings, and it was just such a brilliant event. We had about 50 people there, and I think for me that event really highlighted the support and the need for the campaign. And there was a lot of things came from that, which will be in the report as well. Revelations. There was just a lot came from that event. And actually, it was I think, the spur that you need to keep going when it's such a long campaign. And then obviously it was the only fundraising event that we did, and it was enough to sustain the campaign through the year as well. And that was followed on by the 18th of March, our Inspirational Women campaign panel event, which we had Madeline Black again, Jill Baird, Samantha Billingham, and Maddie Reid. And that was brilliant. That was really inspiring, just listening to all their stories. And Maddie had given us some history, some of the historical sides as well, which was amazing. Of April was the introduction to the youth panel, and then 22nd of April was the perceptions panel, which I thought was brilliant. But actually, you're going to talk a bit more about the perceptions panel. For me, Lee stood out in this one.
So I totally agree. This was our first male panelist of the campaign, and we had been talking about getting men involved in the conversation, I suppose, right from the January. So it took us the best part of 4 months to actually get a man to come around the table and have this open conversation. And he blew me away. So in terms of the panel itself, we had the discussion in and around the cultural perceptions agenda and how there needed to be a really significant change in society views in order for us to end violence against women and girls and to improve the safety for all, including our younger generations. Of course, we had Maddie Reid on the panel, and again, she brought a historical sort of background to that as well. And I think we come back to history throughout this campaign, where actually very little has changed over the years. In fact, some of it's gotten worse and more difficult to deal with and more difficult to handle, which I'm sure, Heather, you'll touch on when you talk about online dangers and grooming. But like, as we started to unbox this, it became really clear that there was so much more conversation to have. So we had Maddie, we had Dawn Fife, who was involved in the Glasgow Girls Club Partnership app. We had Lee McGuinness and we had Lucy. There was a real mixed representation on this panel, and that I think was our goal all along, was to have a real mix of different individuals around the table. And I think it was at this point that we as hosts and people that are running this stepped aside as well. I think that was a big point, that okay, we can come on and we can speak about what we're learning, but actually let's hear from the people that have been affected. Let's learn from their experience. So that was a real turning point in the campaign for me. I think Dawn Fife raised a really, really poignant point about the historical perceptions of women being seen as property, and that really leaving women vulnerable to safety and violence. And I think that was, again, another big standout point. We also looked at unconscious bias and gender inequality. We looked at non-binary perspectives in that. So, again, pulling Maddie's key points from the blogs because it summarises them really, really well. And then the sort of last point that we touched on was that making construction industries accessible and making sure that women can actually be part of it. And maybe this was the shift in culture. And I've got to say, Lee blew me away. It's like, wow, what a different way to look at it, rather than trying to challenge the culture that's within these industries at the moment. It's like, why don't we change the culture by bringing more people in. Let's educate people. Let's encourage women joining the sector. And that, again, I think that was just a real key point. He spoke very openly about his own experience, and perhaps not his specific industry, but noticing it in other industries where there was wolf whistling and harassment and a loads of different sort of issues that come up. But he was he shared his experience in terms of why men might not come into the conversation, that they feel a fear that they'll just all be criticised and we're going to tar everybody with a one brush. And so I think he offered a perspective for all men, and what he said that day is like, how do we get men to be part of the conversation? Because it starts with men. We know that most violence that's perpetrated against women and indeed men is committed by men. So we need to start challenging that. And it was very much the stereotyping that goes on was really, really clear throughout this panel. It was very much, again, we come back to that education piece. So it's these panels are an eye-opener. It doesn't matter what one you watch, what one you read about. There is a learning point in there. And I think that's a running theme throughout the consultation, the campaign that we've done, is that actually we need to be looking at education. How do we change what's available now to make it better and make it more inclusive for everybody? The cultural challenges, like that's a long-term thing, but one of the reasons we've done this campaign is to hopefully try and start challenging some of that. And then, of course, we need institutional change. Like things must change from the top. So yeah, that's the perceptions panel and education.
It was indeed an education. Right, so next up was 17th of June was online dangers and grooming, and there's a right crossover with this one and with the youth panel. We had Jeremy, Indica, Marianne, Kim, Stuart Allardyce. It was a really, really strong panel, as they all were. Some of the takeaways for me, quite a lot of the previous part, so I won't go into too much, but for me was Stuart talking about digital parenting and how digital parenting is the new way of parenting, because we can't keep our children safe if we can't communicate and educate ourselves and parent with that in mind, which is, that title for it for me was standout, because that's just nails it. And everyone I've spoken to, family and friends, it's a fear. People don't know how to do it. It's so new. And then high schools as well. He'd done something in high schools where they'd done a survey with pupils, and they said that pupils didn't want to speak to their parents anything, they'd seen anything, they didn't feel they could do that without their parents just going, I'll just take the phone off you if you're looking at that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. That was a natural way to be, you use it as a threat, as a punishment to take people's phone off them, when actually it should be an open conversation about, okay, what do you think, you feel, what we're going to do about this, etc. And it comes back to that digital parenting. Jeremy had a really good standout point for me, is that we need to empower children to make the right decisions online, and that us asking them, oh, what you're looking at is a bit dinosaur. They need to be influenced and taught by the things that they're seeing, like TikTok, like TV. Us as parents teaching them isn't going to be enough, because we don't know enough. And that's what Kim had said, that actually kids are like, oh, we know more than you. They probably do know more than us when it comes to digital life. So we need to be open with them and have that conversation. And actually, it's been mentioned today already, but Marianne said that strains are outdated when it comes to online gaming, because some of the relationship building on gaming can be positive relationship building. So it was a total minefield. Much learning in there, and actually that was a brilliant one, if not slightly terrible. And next up was and I think for this, the first learning is that we had a bit of a discussion around what it was going to be called, because first of all, we called it the queer panel, because we've been educated that the youth are taking the word queer back and using it as, you know, in replacing LGBTQIA+. When we were in school, calling somebody queer was an insult, and we worried about that. But this being a youth campaign, we went with the youth. However, we then got feedback that some people did find it still offensive. So we did go with the safe route of going with LGBTQIA+, but we don't think it's an issue to talk about or share this, because this is an open platform. And that was one of the big takeaways from this panel, was that there's such a fear to talk about it because we make mistakes, particularly, you know, I could say the older generations, but us, you know, everyone makes mistakes because there's so much to learn and there's such a fear of saying the wrong thing. I know all three of us have said the wrong pronoun for somebody already on this call, somebody we know well and respect. So we have done that, and that is a mistake on our part, but it's a learning, and we will get there with constant learning. And I think before this panel, or before that particular panel and this whole thing, I'd have been scared and worried that I'd done that, whereas now it's about learning and admitting mistakes and taking that forward. So we had Elijah, Maddie, Debbie, Edward, and Sheila on that panel. And again, a real nice mix of people on there, and it was such a nice conversation. It was interesting hearing from Sheila about Section 28, where, like, within a lot of our lifetimes, that you couldn't be in certain workplaces or talk or promote being gay at all. Again, it came up about influence of key people on socials and TV, teaching the right things, people being scared to talk or address issues out of being pulled up for incorrect pronouns, titles, the wrong, you know, people didn't even know what LGBTQIA+ was. So we had a brilliant blog written by Maddie that said what it all was, and it was so educated. And I've actually shared that so many times since. And yeah, it was just a real education about bringing everyone in and making it inclusive for everybody. And then next up, so I'm flying through these because I'm aware that we said we'd finish at past. So the next one was the 21st October, which was the men's panel. And again, this was brilliant. So the men's panel was the one panel that we all stepped back from and left it to the men.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So actually, tell us a bit more about the men's one.
I think for me, what captured this like the entire conversation, was how do men fit in to what we're trying to do here? What's a man's purpose and safety for everybody? We had David Russell, Lee was back on, and we had Alexander from Thriving Survivors. They spoke in depth about media and how that influenced their view of self. Do you know how they viewed themselves and how wider society viewed them as well? And trying to fit into that box. I think Alexander nailed it when he spoke about actually just man up. How often did you hear that? Do you know? And like, when boys are, historically, as boys are raised, they're raised not to cry, they're raised to be tough, they're raised not to display emotion and to sort of keep that to themselves, especially West of Scotland boys. However, that doesn't quite fit with the conversation that they had around the table, that actually it's took time to sort of start challenging that. And I think Alexander again spoke about emotional intelligence and being able to cultivate that. What a lovely place for people to start is by looking at their own level of emotional intelligence, and then that would sort of steer people's behaviour. Emily spoke about everybody being trauma informed. Emotional intelligence sort of sits at at the base of that for me. I think they go hand in hand. You need to understand your own emotions and what's going on there before you can go and do anything with anybody else's. And I think the men captured that really, really well as they went through their panel. They spoke about how men can be allies in problematic behaviour, and yeah, it was such a wonderful panel for us to get together, because we did not think it was going to happen. So to see it come together, to see them sort of talk through this and really again address the stereotypes that perhaps men face. So that's for me another running theme throughout this campaign is stereotypes, and I think that needs a lot more discussion in terms of how we start to challenge those, and how men can actually challenge this sort of changing room behaviour, where it's all right for us to crack rude jokes, and it's all right for us to say derogatory things about women, about non-binary people, about people that identify different to a man. So it's about how do they challenge that. So that's what I took from that, as well as the list of resources that came along with it. You know, there is tools available for us to actually start conversations and to really start challenging some of these behaviours. So yeah, again, for me, this was another really impactful panel, and I think there's lots of learning that can come from it as well, because it was a diverse panel, again, very diverse.
It was, and it was hard to get the guys together, because we have tried, we've had men on the panels throughout, but they are men that either work in the industry or relate to that particular topic. Just males in general coming forward to do this didn't want to, and that's why it was important for us as females not to be on the panel, to allow them. Now this brings up another topic, and it kind of goes into that we've had challenges along the way. We've had challenges. It's not been plain sailing. The biggest one being the keeping the momentum and enthusiasm and going for such a long campaign, but it was important, because the whole purpose was to bring lots of campaigns together, and you get so many amazing campaigns, but when they're short, they only tend to have a certain lifespan, whereas if we can bring it all together in one, you need time to do that, but it's not easy. So one of the big challenges obviously was getting men to the table, and that again comes back to a lot of the subjects we've talked about, like perceptions, stereotypes, historical biases, and I mean, there's certain topics that just scream out throughout the whole year that just kept coming up. So yeah, we've already talked about right at the start, making it exclusive. So not just women, making it inclusive to everybody. So that was the first one, but actually that wasn't a massive hurdle for us, because it just made sense, and we changed it straight away. The name of the LGBTQIA plus event we've talked about as well. And that one I think gave us all the fear a little bit, because we'd had that mentioned it before we named it. And then do we change it? Do we keep it? If it's for the youth and the youth are taking the queer, do we keep it? Actually, everyone's involved here, and we need to be inclusive for everybody. So we changed the name. Whether it was right or wrong, it was done with the best of intentions, and the conversation was that we've had the conversation. It's one that I think everyone can agree that it's a difficult one to actually get right, but it is an education, another common theme.
Yeah.
Getting men to the table, we've discussed, got a list of the challenges, maintain the long campaign. Controversial opinions. So we can probably agree that throughout this, not just on the panel events, but from feedback and from people watching and friends and family with as well, a lot of controversial opinions and discussions and views, which I think has been brilliant, because that's the whole purpose in it, isn't it? It's about somewhere that everybody can talk and everyone can say what they want to say without being insulting to others, but a place that we can all give our honest opinions and views, because that's what will make our relevant.
Yeah,
Totally.
absolutely.
Mhm.
And then the big elephant in the room as well that we should probably bring up as well is linked with Thriving Survivors, the restorative justice work that you're doing, Ashley. And we knew at the start of the campaign that there are quite a few safety campaigns and organisations out there that are not pro-restorative justice, and that may impact the campaign as it went along. There has been people we've had involved who have stepped back since, and yeah, we decided actually having the three of us involved at the start of the campaign opened it up to a much wider audience as well. And if there was going to be an impact, then at least we had as wide an audience as possible. So yeah, the RJ stuff has made an impact, but we have still had the most amazing array of people around the table.
Amazing.
So what is next? So obviously we've got Connie, who is writing up the paper that's going to go to the government with the assistance of yourself, Ashley. So just to draw things to a close, what is the process now for the paper?
So once we finish the panels and we get the last of the blogs written up, and as Connie and I will start work on what the report will look like, what we're going to put in there, then it will go through a process of being drafted, going out for further comment, and we'll probably look to get some quotes just from the people that have been involved. And certainly if there's anybody watching and you would like to add a comment, then please stick that in there. But we're looking to measure the impact of this campaign. So like Heather said in the previous panel, I can imagine you will hear from us again soon. And just to allow us to have that sort of full rounded report before we actually take the next steps, which will be to take it to our Scottish Government funders and under the SOCAS fund. So they currently fund our core service. And we'll take that report to them, and hopefully then we'll get that out and on a wider publication for ministers from all sectors to come and have a look, because I think the work that we've done cuts across so many different sectors that we have within Scotland and so many different policy areas. So I think it's really important that we get it as widely circulated as we can at a Scottish Government level. And then from there, we will make it publicly available, and that you'll be able to find that, I would imagine, on all free websites and social media channels.
You have indeed.
Wonderful.
Well, indeed.
So that's us at the end for the public viewings, for our panel events. We will write this up into a blog this hour and a half. Oh, it's going over again like our first panel. Repeating history here.
That's the one thing we've not learned.
Work in progress. Yeah, we'll get all this written up, but this will be our final live panel event. We will keep everyone up to date with the paper, how it's going, when it's ready, when it's viewable for everybody. I have absolutely no doubt that all three of us will use a lot of the stats and findings in our future socials and events. But for everyone that's watched along the way, everyone that's been in the panels, thank you so much. Without everybody's support, there's not a chance it would have kept going this length. But yeah, go on to Thriving Survivors, and in the blog section, you can find every single blog and every single panel is all there. And it's amazing reads. None of them take too long. The panel events are a minimum of an hour each, but you cut it down to a 5-minute read in the blogs as well. And the whole purpose is to educate and to share. So please read them, be educated and share. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much.